Thank you guys so much for coming. We're really excited for this particular web series and the opportunity that it brings to have all of us be a part of the conversation. So thank you all for joining us. I do want to let you know that we are recording the call for those who weren't able to make it tonight. We also are muting your microphone so that we can hear our speakers clearly, but you will have the chance to unmute in breakout groups later. So we're excited for that too. And it's my honor to introduce our panelists for the night. I'll go ahead and introduce them all before handing it over to them. First, we're gonna have Rick Smith, class of 1968, who's gonna share why he gave to the Common Reading Experience and the value that it holds for first-year students, as well as our whole Albion community tonight. Rick has served as the editor-in-chief, the chairman, and CEO of Newsweek, and is the current president of the Pinkerton Foundation. He's a life trustee here at Albion College and is one of the only people to give 2 graduation speeches here at Albion. LaRhonda Richarson, class of 2021, is an Albion student from Lathrop Village, Michigan. She's a part of the CRE task force, the Common Reading Experience. A history and Spanish double major with a concentration in secondary education, and is the president of Core for Education, an FYE mentor and tour guide coach. LaRhonda will be sharing her views of the book and the significance of the graphic novel format tonight. And then Alan Headbloom, class of 1975, is a cross-cultural communication consultant and the producer of the documentary that you were sent before this, Newcomer Legacy, a Vietnamese American story in West Michigan. As a student, Alan was a German major, an RA, studied abroad in Freiburg, Germany, and lived in the I House. Alan will be sharing context on the immigrant experience tonight. So they are all 3 dynamic leaders who are passionate about the power of reading and the importance of cross-cultural experiences. So thank you guys so much for joining us. And I'm gonna hand things over to Rick to share a little bit about why the Common Reading Experience is so valuable.
Thank you, Hannah. I hope this doesn't come across as the, and now a word from our sponsor segment of the program, but I'll try to keep it commercial brief. As Hannah mentioned, I was on the board for many years. In fact, I was on the board for so many years that when somebody asked me when I joined, I said it was shortly after the earth cooled. But one of the most genuinely exciting times during my years on the board was discussing and then funding Albion's first year experience. Our goal was to provide a "you're not in high school anymore" experience. The idea was to focus on what makes an Albion education different. Small classes, hands-on experiences, faculty willing to break free from their academic silos to engage with other disciplines, and above all, to challenge students to think for themselves. The Common Reading Experience was a small but important part of that program. The goal being to literally put every first-year student on the same page. Albion in those days was a pretty insular, homogeneous place. In many ways, it still is. We've made a lot of progress in that area, but it was definitely homogeneous in those days. And my hope was that the book selections would both create community and emphasize diversity, to expose students to other cultures and experiences, and then to prompt critical thinking about what they had read. I've had literally nothing to do with the book selections. I'm informed every year and happy about the choices. In fact, I've been delighted by the choices, and this year's book is no exception. The best we could do works on so many levels. It's a creative and artistic surprise. It's a history lesson about a country and a war that are little known or perhaps completely unknown to most college freshmen. It's a gripping tale of what it's like to be caught in conflict and the perils of the refugee experience. It illuminates America's ambivalence about newcomers. And it shows that while we call ourselves a country of immigrants, we're often hostile to newcomers, particularly newcomers of color. But to me, the real strength of the book, and maybe the one that will resonate the most with new college students, is that it's an unconventional coming of age story. We see Thi's dramatically evolving attitudes about her parents, an exaggerated example of what everyone her age goes through, where parents go from being the center of a young person's life, then through a transition to a gradual separation that allows sons and daughters to see their parents as human beings in all their strengths, frailties, and complexity. In Thi's case, the revelations aren't complete until she has a child of her own. How powerful are those parent-child bonds? I'll close by sharing something from my journalistic life. Over the years, I've interviewed dozens of CEOs and leaders of organizations. And I've learned that if I could ask only one question to unlock a leader's motivation, ambition, and outlook on life, it would be the following. Tell me what you admired the most and admired the least about your parents. The answers are always different, but they also always lead to a fascinating and revealing conversation. I hope this book and all the books in the Common Reading Experience over the years lead to those kinds of deep and important conversations. And it's a pleasure to be with you to hear what you all have to say. Thanks, Hannah.
Yes, thank you, Rick. And I'm going to hand things over to LaRhonda to share a little bit about the graphic novel format.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. Going off what Rick said, as a member of the CRE, which is the Common Reading Experience Committee, we took his, sorry, I'm a little nervous, took his reasoning for giving us the donation for the Common Reading Experience book to heart. So we believe that the Common Reading Experience is all about not only teaching students to adapt to the life of college, but to also prompt them to start searching for their own self-identity. This imposes the overarching theme of self-discovery and investigation in an own person's background through someone else. So with our decision in choosing this book, we read a total of 7 different books, and we quickly decided that this one, along with another, were our 2 finalists. And we chose this one because we thought that students would be able to connect more, not only with the graphic novel and being able to see Thi's story as it's also being told, but also hearing an experience that is often, as Rick said, unheard and unpublicized in the US. So the reason that we chose a graphic novel is, like I said, it's because the students are able to connect with it more. They're able to see the story, see the emotions, see the reactions in it, and they're able to see themselves in a story. It's more than just telling a story as I am right now. It's when you see a story, it's almost like the saying is true, a picture has 1,000 words. And through this year, we decided to keep going with this book because we used it last year as well. Because this year, Dr. Johnson made a bold announcement that he was starting a journey to make Albion's campus anti-racist. To first become an anti-racist campus, we first have to understand the life and story of different groups of students here on campus. And we are able to highlight different groups through Thi's memoir. We decided to reuse this book because of not only this journey, but to help students identify their own identity and their own race through what they learn here on campus and through this book. Now, as an FYE mentor, I have an extremely, extremely positive role in helping students and pushing them to this self-discovery. Now, Hannah, do you mind presenting the comic strips now? Okay, so because this is a graphic novel, we wanted to create kind of a fun story for our activity for all of the students. So what we did is we used the app Comic Life to create different comic strips. The one you're seeing now is the one I did as an example for all of the students. This is from my own first year experience class where my class focused on the story of Don Quixote. And at the end of the semester, we were able to take a trip to Spain and follow just a little bit of the Ruta de Quixote, where you see many of the landmarks that are thought to be the route that Don Quixote took in the storybook. Also, I studied abroad last fall, so I wasn't here for the actual event, but a lot of students and classes completed their own stories, and they are now hanging outside of the Ludington Center and can be viewed in just a simple walk downtown. So we encourage students to look at Thi's story and to see her struggles and all the emotions and the deep reflection that she took in this story, and to now reflect on their own. So as Hannah goes through this slide, you'll be able to see all of the different stories that the students were able to tell. Now, some of them are longer and more graphic, some of them are plain and a little bit mellowed, but each student was able to tell their individual story. And that is one thing that we wanted to make sure that we posed during the reading of this book, because we not only wanted the students to understand the history, but also to have a chance to reflect on their own lives and to have a little bit of a head start on this journey that the entirety of Albion's campus is taking to become anti-racist. So that is my take on why we chose the book and why it's important that it is a graphic novel. I will hand it back off to Hannah.
Great. Thanks so much for sharing. I know for me, so much of this book was making me analyze my own story. So it's cool to see students depict that. So now I'm going to pass things off to Alan to share a little context about the area and the immigrant story.
Thanks so much, Hannah. And I really want to thank you for inviting me to participate, going third and having a chance to listen to both Rick and LaRhonda talking. What I really appreciate, first of all, huge tip of the hat to Rick for this initiative and creating a commonality of conversation and really bringing first year students together thematically, and then just overall, giving them something to chew on, over serious stuff to chew on over the course of the months that lie ahead of them. And I'm especially grateful that this experience tonight brings together, someone from Rick's generation, and I'm as class of '71, and just on the tail of Rick's presence.
You're a kid.
At Albion, or actually class of '75, started at '71, and LaRhonda, because we're spanning 5+ decades of Albion studies and looking at what these powerful initiatives have to promise us to carry the conversation forward and create new awarenesses. So for me, I had the blessing, I guess, of having grandparents who were immigrants. And so growing up, just, foreign accents were just part of being. And when I was 12 years old, had the luxury of spending the summer with my grandfather back in the old country, which was Sweden. But people going around speaking something that wasn't English, behaving in ways that weren't North American. And so from this early age, I had my eyes open, because so many of us live in the US, we're surrounded, you drive thousands of miles across the country and you're seeing the same big box stores, listening to English on the radio. And so we're just surrounded by this monoculture in many ways. And so anytime you can get outside the box, I know LaRhonda had a chance to study in Spain. I had the luxury of studying in Germany and then staying on for an additional half a year, living with a family and immersing myself in new ways of thinking. And that profoundly affected me in my career. And so I went on to study applied linguistics, and I have clients from more than 50 countries. And I'm starting to catch up with representing all those countries with flags on my mantle, but creating this new awareness. And I have to say that all of us, think we're getting woke, but there are always, you just have to examine one more, just turn over one more rock, one more leaf, and you recognize, holy cow, there are other things that I've missed. And so it's only been in the last dozen years since I started working with in the Grand Rapids Institute for Healing Racism, to sort of, even tear back the blinders even further to recognize things like growing up in Oakland County, Michigan, the white privilege that you grow up in and didn't recognize. And yes, you can get some things, but my grandparents came here, all blue-eyed and blonde-haired, and yeah, they got accepted. And of course, they worked hard. But you look at families like Thi Bui, and the fact that there were tons of folks who didn't accept them. And when Saigon fell in 1975, the majority of Americans did not want Vietnamese refugees here. But Jerry Ford said, no, we will take these people in. They have no place to go. And it's, as Rick alluded to earlier, it's kind of our proud heritage, land of immigrants, but that glossy story has lots of holes in it. And so, we shouldn't be too quick just to put out that as a platitude without recognizing the inherent racism and how just really slowly over, decades and generations, Italians didn't used to be considered white, right? And okay, so now, okay, we'll let the Italians in, but those dirty potato eating papists from Ireland, now we're not going to let them in. And so we're just grudgingly giving up this American dream to other people. And so, the Vietnamese had their story. And so for me, this was a really important book and conversation. And for me to have made my transition, because like the majority of college students in the 1970s, we were against the Vietnam War. And a lot of us marched against that. And then in 2016, 2017, I got approached by the West Michigan Asian American Association. Would you create a documentary on Vietnamese refugees? And because I had been exposed over the years of my local talk show, interviewing Vietnamese among dozens and dozens of other folks from all over the world, said, yeah, let's take an in-depth look at the life stories of Vietnamese. And the most important thing in getting to understand those folks is to sit down and eat with them, is to talk with them, is to hear their stories. Because once you get a story, then they go beyond those generalizations of those people, because then you can start to see individuals and see their lives and recognize who they are. And one of the most profound moments that I had in the making of the documentary was I was working with my cameraman and editor, and we were interviewing this one terrific, one of the 9 who were interviewed for the documentary. And he's the fellow who was just an ordinary soldier in the Vietnamese Army, South Vietnamese Army. And then when he left, he became a boat person. He thought he might never see his family again. Came to the US, worked super hard. He had some skills in heating and cooling, started his own business, and just retired very recently. But like hardworking, salt of the earth kind of guy, still speaks with a fairly accented English, but just a lovely human being. And my cameraman, I remember, he was just really profound. He said, I'd be proud to have Ngoc as my next door neighbor. And anytime that they belong in your community because of what they're putting out and who they are, that just speaks volumes. And so for me, we need to always be open to the humanity of others around us and give them a chance to make their lives work the way that our parents or grandparents or great-grandparents had a chance to work. So this is my interest in the story. I was honored to be included as part of the programming. The day that Thi came and spoke, she was an amazing speaker, just a wonderful human being. And then we had a chance to screen the documentary that evening in Albion, and just loved the curiosity of the students. And I'm just really glad to help carry this conversation forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan. Thanks, Amy, for posting the link to the documentary in the chat if anybody wants to take a look. It's only 35 minutes. It's not as scary as a documentary sounds. Which
one bowl of popcorn.
No. So we're going to go into discussion groups, into groups of 5 or 6. And I'm going to post. Sorry, I ended up muted somehow. I'm going to go ahead and post back here. And if you could copy and paste or click on it just to open those up so that when we go into the breakout rooms, you can see what questions to talk through. That would be great. My recommendation is that when you get into your breakout group, go ahead and select a leader for the conversation, because it can get awkward not knowing who's supposed to talk first. And then once you've chosen your leader, feel free to reflect on some of these questions for longer. You don't have to get through them all. This is simply to facilitate a conversation that you want to have. So if you want to spend most of your time talking about what you resonated with in the book, you can do that. If you want to talk about the immigrant experience, you can focus on that, whatever works best for your group. So I'm going to let you guys go into your breakout groups, and you'll get a 5-minute warning. We're going to have about 15 minutes total in these groups. So have fun opening all the rooms now. All right, well, welcome back. I hope you guys had good conversations in your breakout rooms. I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about those. But we thought we'd wrap up tonight when LaRhonda, Alan, and I were talking about what we really wanted to see as a result of tonight. We talked about how one of the most beautiful parts of the book is the way that she gets to know her own story, but also how through reading the book, you learn a story that's different than your own. And so LaRhonda and Alan are gonna both share a story of when they met someone that was different than them and how that impacted them. So LaRhonda, would you wanna go first?
Yes, I can totally go first. Sorry, I didn't follow the directions, especially to Thi, but I want to share a very special story about someone that I know personally. So when I was very young, my mother actually passed away, but growing up, I knew her to be this very bright and fighting person, and she never let anybody see her struggle. And so through that, I learned to just walk through life with a brave face. And it wasn't until after she passed away that I was talking with my aunts, who I'm actually very happy that they're here on this call today, that I got to learn about her past life and what she used to do and how she was, and how that brave fighting spirit wasn't just because she was sick. It was how she lived life. And they tell me every day that they see her in me, and that brings tears and joy to my eyes, and I love it every day. So that's a story that I like to share, because I learned about my mother's past through people who saw her and not through her directly. And it's kind of like how I learned about Thi's story as well, because I learned it through the book and not through her directly telling me face to face. And because I was studied abroad, I wasn't able to hear her talk last year. So I'm very proud of that story and how I learned about not only my own history, but also my mother's, and how I continue to walk through life and learn about others as well. So thank you. And I will pass it off to Alan to share his story.
To mostly be self-employed and work with immigrants and expats from every corner of the world. And so in a general way, I've had a chance to learn and be taught by people from every continent and every faith expression. And I'm just constantly humbled by what I don't know, but what I get the gift of receiving every day. And just one small example, on the TV show early on, we interviewed a Bosnian refugee. So really smart fellow. He went on to do a master's degree. He now works in human resources in Chicago, but Grand Rapids was a hub for Bosnian resettlement in the 1990s after the genocide there. And just working with him and talking about the connection between people of other faiths and human resources, because the job of human resources is to make all these humans be able to work together. And just talking about, you go around every, end of December wishing people Merry Christmas. Well, Bosnians who are mostly Muslim don't care. And that's just, it may not be an insult, but it's at least obliviousness. And so every time you learn one more micro detail about people's lives, it opens you up to new realities and saying, oh, just because I celebrate Christmas or just because I am able-bodied doesn't mean everyone else walks through life or rolls through life with the same, abilities and privileges and awarenesses and also blinders that I do. And so the greatest gift for me is this daily learning of new things from people who have experiences very different from mine. And so I was really delighted to hear when Thi was coming to Albion, because I think we often skip Asians and Asian Americans in this conversation. Obviously, the 400, 500-year history of Europeans on this continent, that story is bookended by black and white and this tension between. But we don't talk nearly enough about Arab Americans, and we definitely don't talk a lot about Asian Americans. And so hooray for opening our eyes to this and their travails over life in the United States over the last 40 years.
Thanks for sharing, Alan and LaRhonda. It's so cool to hear that you actually took the opposite sides of the question, right? The self-exploration and the exploration of people who are different than us. So we just hope that everyone who's on the call tonight could just take a second and think about one step that they could take to either understand their own story or ethnic identity more, or to reach out and meet someone who has a different story than you. One amazing part about being a student at Albion College right now is there's someone else on your hall that has a very different story than you. And I hope that as first-year students especially, you're able to have those experiences this year. It can be harder, I think, once we're out on our own to cognizantly choose to meet people who are different than us. So I hope for the alumni on the call too, that that's something that you can think through. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending tonight. We are going to let people unmute their microphones and just say hi and hang out after the scheduled programming. But I just want to make a couple announcements before then. One is that there is another Common Reading Experience event tomorrow. So normally we have a big panel or speaker come to campus, and as all large gatherings are, this one will be on Zoom this year. But what's great about that is that alumni from all over the country are welcome to join tomorrow in a way that normally wouldn't happen if you had to come to Albion. And I'm going to drop the links to all of these opportunities in the chat if you want to see more about them. Also, homecoming is virtual, another large gathering turned virtual, but we have so many different ways that you can engage with our homecoming events, and in some ways it might be our most accessible homecoming ever, because you don't have to have a flight or the weekend free to tune into one of these events. So we hope that you'll be able to connect with us there. And our next year of inauguration web series event with President Johnson will be October 14th, kicking off that homecoming week. He's going to be with Professor of Chemistry, Cliff Harris, and Professor of Communications, Karen Arlinson, who classically have a ChemCom tailgate that they will now host virtually. So if you are interested in any of those events, we hope that you'll check them out. Once again, thank you for coming, and we hope that this can be a step in your anti-racist journey. So thank you to Rick and to Alan and LaRhonda. We're so grateful to learn with and from you. So that's the end of our scheduled programming. If people want to unmute and say hi, they're welcome to do so.